Welcome to the Tale of the Chicken Sandwich Project and the 49 Processes. It's a humorous story to help you recall the 49 processes. It started off with Tammy being the project manager in the project for the chicken sandwich. And in Develop Project Charter, Tammy put a project charter together that charted the course. Then they identified all the stakeholders on the project and they began developing the project management plan. Now, all the other yellow spots that you're going to see were things that eventually would lead back into the project management plan. So they planned how to manage scope. They collected the requirements for the project, which said everything must be from scratch. They defined scope, which included going to the Atlantic and the Pacific, because that would need to be part of the project scope since the chicken sandwich had to be done from scratch. They created a work breakdown structure that showed a graphical depiction of the project from top down. They planned how to manage the schedule. They defined the activities, listing out all the tasks that had to be done. They sequenced the activities, putting them in order, and they estimated the durations. How long will each task take? Next, they developed the schedule. And then they moved into planning cost management. How will we manage costs? They asked. They put that plan together and then they began to estimate the cost. They determined the budget by rolling up the itty bitty task estimates into a final total amount in determined budget. Moving on, they planned how to manage quality and how to manage resources and plan resource management. And then they estimated the activity resources. What this entailed was asking how many, how much, human equipment, material supplies, and facilities. They then moved into planning communications management. How are we going to communicate on this project? And then the next question, plan risk management. How are we going to manage risks on the project? Afterwards, they identified risks. One of the risks was a crazy rat infestation and the coming of the vegans because, hey, chicken sandwich or chicken, they weren't having any of it. Anyway, they moved into performing a qualitative risk analysis, taking a look at the risks and saying, is this high, medium, or low? At the end of the day, they scored the rat infestation and the coming of the vegans quite high. And then they did a quantitative risk analysis by putting a dollar amount. The dollars were quite high, not so much on the rat infestation, but more on the coming of the vegans. So what they did was they put aside some risks in their risk response plan, whether to avoid, transfer, escalate, accept, or mitigate. Part of their plans, well, you'll find out soon. Moving on to plan procurement management, they planned how to manage procurements, they planned how to engage the stakeholders, and then they began executing the work, directing and managing the project work, getting all the stuff done, planting the fields, getting all the work done. As part of their work, they were managing project knowledge because this is where lessons learned were gleaned and put together. And then moving into managed quality, this is where they checked to make sure that each leaf of lettuce was as leafy and lush as possible and the chicken was ready for action. Then they moved into acquire resources, acquiring all the resources needed for the project, human equipment, material supplies, and facilities. They developed the team by motivating and encouraging them, managed the team by giving them feedback. At the end of the day, managed communications was carried out by giving periodic updates as far as how the project was proceeding. Next, they moved into implementing risk responses. And I told you one of the crazy responses was to appease the vegans with tofu treats. Needless to say, it might work. We'll find out. They moved into conduct procurements, making sure that all the vendors and sellers were doing what they promised. They managed stakeholder engagement by communicating with the stakeholders, giving them samples to make sure they were happy and to ensure that any issues were taken care of ahead of time. Moving into the monitoring and controlling process group, they began to monitor and control the project work as it was being carried out. They also began to deal with integrated change control. And one of the crazy change requests that someone came up with was, why don't we use quail instead of chicken? Well, needless to say, the change control board shut that down and then moved into validate scope, where what was done was, of course, reviewed. But don't forget that I haven't told you what happened during the control quality process because that technically comes before validate scope. But since we're going down the list, we're talking about validate scope first. And needless to say, this is where the customer checks the deliverable. Control scope is where scope creep is prevented. Control schedule is where you ensure that The schedule is moving according to plan and impediments are removed schedule-wise. Control cost is where you ensure that the budget is being met and that any impediments budget-wise are removed. Control quality is where I said we check the deliverable. So in control quality, they did find that everything was according to their initial quality plan, and therefore the customer did accept invalidate scope. So you can see that there is some interrelationship between this process, control quality, and this process, validate scope. So this really happens first, right? And then that. And if you really wanted to get a very good picture, well, this is actually what ensues. It first begins with the direct and manage project work process, where we create the deliverable, and then we go over here to control quality, and then into validate scope. And just a little segue to explain the dynamics, because it doesn't happen in the order that I narrated the story. Just be aware of that. Moving on, the next process was to control resources and make sure that resources were used as planned, monitor communications to ensure that the communications were going according to plan all through the project, monitor risks to ensure that the risks hadn't changed, and if they had, they would be updated in the risk register. So new risks were added to the risk register. Then control procurements. This is where the team ensures that the contracts are going according to plan, the vendors are performing as targeted, and there are no issues. And going into monitor stakeholder engagement, this is where the team ensures that the stakeholders are properly engaged. Final thing that happens in project management is close project or phase. And this is where the chicken sandwich was handed over to the hungry stakeholder. And as the autumn leaves began to fall, the chicken sandwich project came to a close. The chicken cheerfully charred, the lettuce lovingly layered, the mayo masterfully mixed. The sandwich of legend was complete, and the town of Clockington feasted for 49 days and nights. And in the end, the client, Sir Peckington, declared, "Verily, this sandwich satisfies both mine hunger and my heart." And thus, the chicken sandwich project team were eternally enshrined in the halls of hunger satisfaction and, of course, PMBOK 6. Thank you for listening to this strange tale. I hope it helps you master the processes. You take care and bye for now.